Imagine spending 60 years building a life, working, saving, sacrificing, only to hand every last dollar of it to a stranger on the phone. Not because you were careless, not because you were foolish, but because you genuinely believed you were doing the right thing. That's exactly what happened to Larry and Barbara Cook, an 82-year-old couple from Maine who lost $1.3 million and their entire life savings to one of the most psychologically sophisticated scams law enforcement has seen in recent years. This wasn't a rushed, clumsy operation. It was a slow, calculated 7-month con that dismantled their finances piece by piece while making them feel like heroes the entire time. By the time it was over, the money was gone, the tax bills were stacking up, and the dream they'd spent decades building for vulnerable children in Kenya had been quietly destroyed by people they never met in person. This is the full story of how it happened, why it worked, and what every single person watching this needs to understand before they pick up the phone next time a caller says they're from the government. It started the way so many of these stories do, with a phone call that felt, at first, like a solution. Barbara Cook had been frustrated for months. She and Larry had been experiencing ongoing issues with their Amazon account, unable to place orders, unable to get clear answers, and the problem had dragged on long enough that when 2 men called in September 2023 identifying themselves as representatives from Amazon and TD Bank, her first reaction wasn't suspicion, it was relief. She handed the phone to Larry, and within minutes the tone of the call shifted dramatically. One of the men told him that his name and social security number had been used to make purchases on the dark web. Criminal purchases. The kind that leave a paper trail, the kind that attract federal attention. For a couple who had never been in legal trouble a day in their lives, that information landed like a gut punch. This was no longer a conversation about a malfunctioning Amazon account. This was a conversation about identity theft, criminal exposure, and the very real possibility that their names were now attached to something deeply serious. The scammers had done their homework, and they delivered that opening blow with enough authority and detail to make it feel completely real. From that single phone call, everything else would follow, and the Cooks never saw it coming. What happened next revealed just how carefully this operation had been constructed, because the scammers didn't stop at shock. They immediately gave the Cooks a way out, and that offer of resolution is what truly sealed the trap. Within hours of the initial call, a follow-up conversation introduced the idea that the couple was facing potential legal action if they didn't cooperate. Court proceedings, the callers warned, were already being considered. And it wouldn't stop with Larry and Barbara. Their 2 sons, both established professionals with careers and reputations built over decades, would be pulled into the investigation as well. The threat to the family unit was deliberate and precise. These scammers understood that parents will endure almost anything to protect their children, and they used that knowledge like a weapon. But then, just as the pressure reached its peak, the pivot came. A man introduced himself as Ryan Terry, an agent with the Federal Trade Commission. He explained that the organization was actively tracking a network of cybercriminals, and that the Cooks, through no fault of their own, had become connected to this investigation. There was a role they could play, a legitimate, important, patriotic role, in helping bring these criminals to justice. For a former pastor who had devoted his life to service, that framing wasn't just persuasive, it was irresistible. If there was a single moment that cemented the Cooks' belief in the legitimacy of what was happening, it was when the letter arrived. Printed on what appeared to be official government stationery, bearing a seal purported to be from the then Secretary of the Treasury, the document read like something out of a federal briefing packet. Formal, authoritative, and utterly convincing to 2 people who had no reason to question it. The letter delivered a warning that would become the con's most powerful tool. If the Cooks disclosed anything about their involvement in the investigation to anyone, family members, friends, their bank, anyone at all, their assets would be immediately seized and the case would be compromised. Silence wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory, and violations carried consequences. Larry signed a fake agreement, believing he was formalizing his role as a cooperating civilian in a federal operation. In reality, he was signing away his right to tell the people who loved him what was happening to his money. That document, that signature, that moment, it was the point at which the scammers removed every external safety net the Cooks had. No family, no friends, no bank tellers. Just Ryan Terry on WhatsApp, guiding them forward one step at a time, deeper into something they wouldn't understand for another 6 months. Then the withdrawals began, and what followed was one of the most quietly heartbreaking series of events in this entire story. Terry instructed Larry to start pulling money from their TD bank accounts in increments. Retirement funds, savings accounts, 401k plans, converting it all to cash that could then be moved into Bitcoin or used to purchase gold. The reasoning was always consistent. The criminals behind the investigation knew the Cooks' social security numbers, knew their account details, and the only way to keep that money safe was to move it into what Terry called secure accounts, outside the reach of people trying to steal it. So Larry went to the bank. Again and again he went, and almost every single time, the clerks behind the counter looked at the amounts being withdrawn, looked at Larry and asked him directly, "Is this a scam?" And every time, Larry Cook said no. He said no because he believed it. He said no because Ryan Terry had specifically warned him that tipping off the bank could destroy the investigation. He said no because in his mind, he wasn't a victim. He was a participant in something important, something that required discretion and trust. He walked out of those banks, past those clerks, got into the car where Barbara waited, and drove to the next location. Over 7 months, more than $1.3 million left those accounts. The Bitcoin side of the operation was already deeply unsettling, but the gold introduced a layer of physicality to the scam that made it feel almost surreal in hindsight. Under Terry's guidance, the Cooks began purchasing gold bullion online, real tangible gold, and then waiting for couriers to arrive at their home and collect it. These weren't named delivery services. These were anonymous individuals who showed up at the door of their house near Augusta, Maine, and later at their condo in Naples, Florida, took the packages without conversation and disappeared. Each package was worth somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000. No receipts, no names, no paper trail that could ever lead back to where that gold actually went. Meanwhile, Terry maintained a ritual of verification that kept the Cooks feeling supervised and protected. He asked for photographs before every handoff. Photos of the stacks of $50 and $100 bills. Photos of the gold nuggets laid out and ready for collection. Larry sent them every time, interpreting the photo requests as documentation, as proof that he was doing everything correctly. Terry, on his end, was simply confirming that the operation was running smoothly and that his targets were compliant. And through it all, he kept promising new social security numbers, full reimbursement every dollar returned once the investigation concluded. Looking back at the timeline of the Cooks' 7-month ordeal, there are moments scattered throughout that in isolation might have unraveled the entire thing. But in context, each one was absorbed and explained away before it had a chance to take root. The clearest example came when Terry asked Larry to confirm their Florida address, and then asked him to spell out the name of the city. Naples, a city in Florida. A federal agent based in Dallas, operating within a major government organization, asking a civilian to spell Naples. Larry caught it immediately. He even said it out loud. "You're a government agent. Shouldn't you be able to spell Naples?" Terry had an answer ready. He always had an answer ready. The moment passed. But that wasn't the only layer of manipulation keeping the red flags buried. Over 7 months, Terry had built what felt, to the Cooks, like a genuine human relationship. He asked about their marriage. He marveled at 6 decades together. He opened up about his own troubled relationship, positioning himself as someone emotionally invested in the people he was supposedly protecting. He told Larry that when the case closed, he wanted to meet them in person, sit down, share a meal, ask for their wisdom on how to make a marriage work. He always seemed like a nice, considerate person, Larry said. That warmth wasn't accidental, it was architecture. Larry returned from Kenya in April 2024. He'd been visiting the children's homes run by his nonprofit organization, Kenya's Kids. And when he landed back in the United States, he did what he'd been doing for months. He reached out to Ryan Terry on WhatsApp. The message didn't deliver. He tried again. Nothing. He called the number. No answer. He tried multiple times over the following hours, the silence on the other end growing heavier with each attempt, until he made the decision to contact the FTC directly. He reached out to their regional office in Dallas, the city Terry had referenced repeatedly as his base of operations, and asked for Agent Ryan Terry by name. The person on the other end paused. There was no Ryan Terry. There had never been a Ryan Terry. They transferred him to a victim hotline, and the person who answered told him plainly and carefully what the FTC actually does and does not do. It does not instruct members of the public to move money, does not ask anyone to purchase cryptocurrency or gold, does not conduct investigations through WhatsApp, and does not require civilians to keep their participation secret. He was told to contact the police and the FBI. Agents arrived at the Cooks' home and spent 2 full days reviewing every email, every letter, every document the scammers had sent. Looking at them now, with the spell broken, the spelling errors and grammatical mistakes were everywhere. The couple simply hadn't been reading those documents the way investigators were reading them. They'd been reading them as believers. What emerges from all of this is not a temporary crisis, but a permanent shift. Housing supply is falling toward levels not seen in generations, even as population pressure rises. The government faces an impossible choice: allow the private building sector to collapse entirely or intervene at a scale it cannot afford. Emergency legislation is already being drafted, not to restore ownership, but to manage fallout: temporary housing, property requisitioning, and social containment. Meanwhile, international capital is positioning to become the landlord of last resort, acquiring land cheaply and renting homes back to a population locked out of ownership indefinitely. Scarcity economics will reward possession, not productivity. And once replacement becomes impossible, every existing home becomes irreplaceable. This is how a housing shortage transforms into a housing impossibility, not through a crash, but through arithmetic. And when arithmetic decides an outcome, there is no appeal, only consequences. Larry and Barbara Cook are 82 years old. They lost $1.3 million, their retirement security, a significant portion of their legacy, and 7 months of their lives. And the authorities have told them they don't expect to recover any of it. The people behind this scam understood human psychology at a level most of us never want to think about. They didn't target weakness. They targeted strength. The Cooks' generosity, their sense of duty, their faith in institutions, their love for their family. They used every one of those qualities as a lever, and they pulled each one at exactly the right moment. Larry said it himself. Yes, they were embarrassed. Yes, in hindsight, it seems like something they should have caught, but the architecture of this con was designed specifically to prevent that clarity from arriving in time. They've chosen to go public not for sympathy, but because they know there are other couples right now, in other states, in other living rooms, receiving calls from people who sound exactly like Ryan Terry. And if one person hears this story and pauses before they withdraw their savings, before they say no to a bank clerk, before they send a photo of their cash to a stranger on WhatsApp, then the Cooks will have turned the worst thing that ever happened to them into something that matters. We have transferred our pain and anger to sympathy and empathy, Larry said. That might be the most remarkable thing about this entire story. Not the scam, but what they chose to do after it.